Neil, I've got nurseries on my mind because I've got a 3-year-old at the moment, and so I've actually met some great local nurseries, Oopsie Daisies in Loftus, which I went to recently, and I heard all about the challenges that they face in terms of setting up a business. And one of the pieces of written evidence that caught my attention was from the National Day Nurseries Association, which highlights, of course, that there is a fundamental imbalance now between the private sector providers who are eligible for paying these business rates and then the state-run providers who aren't. And in terms of what percentage, therefore, of the money which we are putting towards nursery education, which is being lost because it's effectively going back into the state and taken away from children's education, do you know roughly what proportion that might represent?
I'm afraid I couldn't give you that figure, but the inequity exists. There's no question about that. I was interested in the comment from one of the colleagues on the earlier panel when we were talking about well, actually, we should adequately fund the sector. So our argument to try and equalise out some of these inequities is, in fact, that we should, A, pay the right rate to the early years sector, and we should have an annual review that keeps it in line so that we don't lurch from whether it happens to be rates this year, whether it happens to be minimum wage next year, etc. Because whilst, and this is an odd thing to say here, but rate relief is not the panacea of all ills. We still have 39,000 childminders who will not benefit from this, and we will still have the voluntary sector who gets 80% relief who will not benefit from this. We're the voluntary sector. We closed 25% of our portfolio last year. So the issue is widespread, but there's no denying that rate relief is a tool, one of the tools that should be there, and particularly so that it doesn't stifle expansion. We've heard from the whole panel that if it stifles expansion, that's contrary to everything that we would want. So that would be the argument for rate relief for me.
Absolutely. With the baby boom underway, we want more places. It's as simple as that. Just on the point about, we heard about the good practice in Harrogate and the way that they achieved the 50% reduction in rates for nurseries. I just wanted to try and square that with what the ICAEW said in their written evidence to us, which is, quote unquote, local authorities currently have very limited discretion to offer additional reliefs. How have Harrogate managed a 50% reduction? Are the ICAEW referring to limited discretion because they're financial constraints, or is it actually that in practice there are obstacles to discretionary relief at this point?
Again, you look at the real-term reduction in terms of funding for local authorities. I think it's an inherent inbuilt restriction.
There's not a legal one per se.
They can do it, but the reality is that there are a million challenges they have, from potholes to whatever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's priorities. And finally, on pubs, again, there's you never short of hearing from pub owners, as a constituency MP. I just wanted to pick up on what the British Beer and Pub Association said in their evidence to us, which is that there was a declining number of valuation officers with pub expertise. Paul, Mandy, why do you think that is, and what can be done to correct it?
I would entirely expect the BBPA to offload the blame onto the VOA.
Yeah.
They are. That's what I think.
That's it. So you don't accept that?
It's very notable that in their submission they didn't make any reference to the actual methodology. They're quite happy with this methodology. Probably less so now, because it's impacting on them as they take pubs back off people like me and actually run them themselves and then incur that business rates liability. In the past, when it's been hard-pushed licensees on suppressed profits who've had to find all of the business rates, not an issue for them at all. It might be now, but it's interesting that they choose to talk about the lack of expertise in the VOA rather than any systemic issue.
In addition to this systemic issue, they closed down the offices of the people who had knowledge about what a fantastic pub Paul's Pub is. And they've, I don't know, they've centralised it to people who probably have, might know how to drink in a pub but might not know how to run one, might not know, that the pub, that Christo's pub behind us is the oldest pub in England. They may not know all these things. Guinness Book of Records.
Sorry.
There's a lack of resource. Now, I think I looked at 20 constituencies in total, and I think there might have been 4 or 5 that had relatively normal results. Everything else was just a crazy mess. So I'd actually like to look at who was looking at those ones, because they might have had somebody that knew what they were doing.
But as a sort of system-wide point, you would say try and bring back specialist.
From the
division.
industry, not necessarily from RICS or somebody like people who really do know the industry.
Yeah.
Even if it's part of the appeals process, but major shortage.
Thank you.
Thank you.